I think they actively discouraged that because of I didn't get into it because I was conscious of time today, but it's interesting how during the rise of nationalism, when nationalism was sort of sweeping the world as the sort of the new paradigm in which to have states, that Britain's was sort of lucky in that because of the linguistic unity of the country, it was quite easy to rebrand the sovereign as a national figurehead. Whereas in countries like Russia, it was a lot more difficult because there was actually a great diversity of languages and cultures, and it was only really after, I think it was Napoleon's invasion of Finland, that the enforced use of Russian in schools came into use. So I don't know. I'm not really looking to reform the monarchy, but I think it is telling that their lack of any sort of real public engagement with their own diverse history, let alone getting into the conversation of Meghan Markle, is very revealing, because they had to rebrand from divinely appointed to national mascot.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, how do you feel about, do you think they're successfully teaching about multiculturalism in school, or do you think they're sort of a bit too nervous or uncomfortable about how to approach it, or do you think it's successful?
Yeah, I think this is a very live issue. I think it seems to come down to individual teachers. I've spoken at several iterations of the Festival of Education, both here in the UK and abroad, and it seems that individual teachers seem to be taking this conversation on in their classrooms, particularly where there are incredibly diverse classes. I think there's something also to be said for having these conversations in less diverse classrooms as well. I think that's probably where the conversation perhaps often needs to be had most. But what I've found incredibly touching, and the great joy of the last few years of articulating both Not Half and having conversations like this, it's been about, often people want to have the conversations, but they don't necessarily have the language. And I think I was very fortunate that in that moment of realization where I started to think of myself as both as opposed to half, it was one of those bizarre things where it seems so obvious now, but at the time I'd only ever thought about halfness. And I think that's when a lot of these conversations have been happening, they hadn't questioned the paradigm of the conversation. And I've had a lot of parents message, actually people of all ages have messaged, but it's always heartening to hear from parents where a child's come home and said, oh, so-and-so said that I'm not English or I'm not this, and a parent's been able to turn around and, if they're old enough, show them my TED Talk or say, well, you're both, you're not half. And just that little shift in mindset has been a joy. So I think it's in the process, and I'm fortunate that I also have peers. This conversation seems to be getting started. One of the struggles with getting this book out was that it's a very new space in publishing the conversation around mixed identity. There was a huge sort of, surge when everybody was posting their black squares and around the Black Lives Matter movement, and publishing was like, oh, we need to publish, more writers of color, and there was a big sort of investment with not a huge amount of other support really, which is quite problematic. But the mixed conversation specifically is quite new. So I think the conversation is starting, and I'm hoping that, by contributing to that conversation, I'm at least able to provide and help give some resources to help with that conversation. I think we're very much at the start of that conversation.
It's a really interesting discussion. I'm thinking about the point that's made about how tied together the monarchy is with patriotism. And I think from a campaigning perspective, you've talked about being both, not half, on a personal basis. But I'm wondering if from a campaigning perspective, could we look at both, not half, on a national level
Mm-hmm.
but they were still Republicans. Is that something that we can look back to in the same way and say, Britain has always been both, not half? It's not always been monarchy, there's always been republicanism.
Yes, absolutely. The second half of my book is very much about how the both not half idea expands beyond. It's about national identity, which I touched on today, but it's also like gender and sexuality, the politics of class, even the philosophy of non-duality, and looking at the world from this. So, I mean, I'm going into philosophy there, but so I'll bring it back to your question. But yes, absolutely. I think this, even just when people talk about, okay, I feel okay sort of identifying as British, but I feel a bit uncomfortable about English. But like, or people talk about like, it's Anglo-Saxon, that's what it means to be English. It's like Anglo-Saxons, it's a hyphenated word. The Angles and Saxons were different peoples. So mixedness is at the heart of Englishness. And so I feel quite comfortable in embracing my Englishness. And I think absolutely that expands into all areas. I think we've been sort of conditioned to see things as being one way or the other. It's this binary way of thinking. It's this thing or it's that thing. But it's not. And I think it would really help. I think it would be a huge support to the campaign to say this is not a modern phenomenon, that this has a deep history. You are participating in a conversation that has depth and a legacy, and there are figures within that who we would hold up as national figures, national heroes. So I think finding ways, because essentially what I'm trying to say is that like national identity is sort of like a cultural technology, and that brings us together with common purpose. And so I don't think there can't really be a way in which I think you abolish the monarchy without it being a part of the story of Britain. So I think we have to find a way to make this, to tell that story. And that's how we as humans, as people, that is how knowledge has always been communicated. So I think, focusing on how we can tell that story more effectively, more engagingly, and get more people around the fire would definitely bear fruit.